Okay, good morning, campers.
Morning.
Today for lunch we're going to have tuna surprise. If you're on the kosher meal, you'll want to see the nurse. She handles that. I just want to let everybody know we're doing skits in the chapel at 4:30 today. The pool's going to be open an hour later because Lenny managed to fix the lights. And we just wanted to remind you that there is still a bear sighted in the woods, so after dark, after lights out, you want to stay in your cabin, walk with a group of people, you want to stay on the lighted paths, and just be smart. Now see, I didn't even want to go to camp. I was one of those bullied kids, just kind of lurky and timid, and I had only recently escaped special ed, which I was in largely because they hadn't quite figured out what was wrong with me, and by the time they did, their response was to just try to find me a hobby. And so they tried a bunch of things. They tried the 4-H club. They tried beekeeping. That one didn't stick. The 4-H club didn't last because a sheep bit me. They tried to get me on the math team, and I was okay on the math team, but as it turned out, in order to stay on the math team, I had to cheat. So to be with the coolest kids in school, I was the math team cheater and caused a major scandal that got us kicked out of the league for a month. But what ended up sticking is I had a guidance counselor who generally did not give me good advice. She gave me the kind of advice where she'd say, think of school as a game. You just have to play the game. And I'm like, most games don't involve people punching me every time I walk down the row of lockers. So eventually she figured something out and she said, we're going to send you to summer camp. And I didn't want to go to camp. All I could think of was Boy Scouts and hazing and crawly things and being hot, and it was terrible, but they insisted, and so I ended up in the summer of 1983 going to the Youth Leadership Institute, which was sort of a diversity training school. And my mom drove me up there. I complained the whole way, and I showed up, and everybody looked sufficiently distracted and crazy, and the camp leader introduced himself, and his name was Dr. Slaughter. Now, I wasn't fully prepared for camp, but I had one thing in my favor, which is I had the best Walkman ever, and I had a Naugahyde brown imitation leatherette case with 24 of the most fantastically constructed mixtapes of all time and enough AA batteries that I thought would last me through the whole entire camping experience. And the group was sort of interesting. We got introduced. We did all those camp exercises where you say your name and then the name of the person next to you, and then they say your name and the name of the person next to them and their name, and it goes around in a circle, and the poor unfortunate at the very end of the line has to say 100 and some names. But it was interesting, and there was a lot of diversity, and I grew up in a little kind of farm community called Skaggsville that was so not diverse that I knew the names of every black person in school, and when I would watch Soul Train, I thought it was science fiction. So suddenly I'm thrust into this urban environment with all sorts of people and all sorts of classes and all sorts of interesting things. There were Jewish kids and Muslim kids and black kids and Latino kids, and I'm just thinking, oh my God, all these kids are going to beat me up. I'm going to be beaten up by every minority. So I just sort of started lurking. I kept my headphones on all the time. As long as the batteries would last, I had 24 fantastically curated mixtapes, and it was going to be good. And I just looked for bullies. And I took a lot of walks in the woods, and we did all the exercises, and soon enough I had a nickname, and my nickname was Jason. And this bothered me in spite of the fact that I'd never seen the movie. I just knew it was kind of something bad, and that you're really not supposed to be identified with a slasher killer. But I was lurky, and I was spooky, and I hung around in the kind of corners, and I would always stick to the edge of a room. And part of the problem was that I had a little secret, and it was when I went to bed, in the middle of the night, something bad would occasionally happen. And it's not what you think. I didn't wet the bed. But I did like to go out for the occasional walk without the full operation of my conscious abilities. And the first night in camp, I thought, okay, I'm gonna be calm, I'm not gonna sleepwalk, I'm not gonna wind up somewhere else in camp, and I was relaxed, and I'd actually started to have some fun and meet some nice people, and Dr. Slaughter turned out to be kind of an amazing guy, and just friendly and funny, and we just did great exercises, and at the end of the night I thought, this is gonna be great, I'm just gonna lay in this horrible rickety bunk on a rubber mattress, which you all are familiar with, and I am not gonna sleepwalk. And that was almost true until I woke up and predictably I was right in the middle of the woods with no flashlight and completely tangled up in brambles with cockleburs going all the way up to my knees. And my immediate response was, shit. Oh my God, I'm gonna get killed at this camp. So the next morning, when we were at breakfast, that's when the morning announcements came, and they're telling us about lunch and the pool and our skits and warning us about a bear, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna get killed by a bear. I'm gonna be sleepwalking and I'm gonna get killed by a bear. But I just kind of kept it in my mind, I'm not gonna get killed by a bear, I'm not gonna sleepwalk, I'm gonna just tangle my hands up into the springs of the mattress in my crappy little bunk and I won't be able to get up. And I kind of keep farmer's hours even now, so I would wake up at 5 a.m. wherever I was, so I woke up at 5 a.m. and I kind of went for a walk. And it's in that blue hour, just before dawn, when the sky goes from black to blue to another blue, and it's trying to figure out exactly what blue it wants to be. So I went out and I hiked up the trails and I followed the ridge line all the way up to the top. And there was a place there where all the trees kind of opened out because the power lines came through, big pylons coming through with these high tension lines that slung down into the valleys below where the farms were. And I found a nice place up there on a rock, and at that time of the morning, the cloud deck was below you, so you just were looking down into the fog, and you could hear the sound of the farm starting up underneath you, and the cows were making their sounds, and the tractors were starting to run. And soon I noticed that I wasn't alone, and somebody had come out of the woods, and it was Dr. Slaughter, the camp leader. And he came up, and I had my headphones on, and he kind of motioned to me. He said, hey Joe, how's it going? And I tried to pretend that I couldn't hear him, but the batteries in my Walkman had died, and I'm not that good an actor. So we just started to talk, and he said, how's camp going? Are you having a good time? I'm like, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, nobody's beaten me up yet, so that's a plus. And he kind of just talked about this and that, and I talked about this and that, and we got around to kind of the subject of, he approached with a little bit of delicacy, and he said, Joe, just so you know, I think you have a secret you want to tell me. And I said, no, I don't have a secret. And he said, I sleep in the room next to yours in the cabin. And I couldn't help but notice that in the middle of the night, you got up and you went somewhere. And because I was a little bit concerned, I followed you. And what I realized was that you were sleepwalking. And I got sort of flushed and sweaty because the secret was out. And I was afraid they were going to send me home. And he said, it's okay, I followed you. And you're actually pretty good at sleepwalking. He said I was a little bit concerned when you were walking along the row of cliffs, but you seemed to have it under control. And I was a little bit worried when you climbed up onto a boulder and jumped 8 feet to get on top of the girls' dorm. But you seemed to get off there fine. And I was a little worried when you got all tangled up in the brambles, but you got out of there, and you seemed to get all the burrs off of your sweatpants, and it was all good. He said, what you might want to do when you go to bed, hide your shoes. And with the secret out in the opening there, I thought, well, my real confession is I am scared to death of that bear. And he said, what? Yeah, you guys keep announcing about that bear. There's a bear in the woods. And I said, I don't want to get killed by a bear. Bears are mean. I don't want to get clawed to pieces. And he said, you do know that you're the bear, right? And I thought about it, and that made a kind of sense. And it was, in a strange way, one of the kindest things any adult had ever done for me. So I just smiled at him and talked about other things, and I pointed out, in that time of the morning, you could actually hear the lines from the power lines hissing and crackling and snapping and making these wonderful little popping, breezy sounds. And he said, yeah, I've noticed that before. And because I was science smart, I said, that's electricity leaking off. And actually, if you come up here with a fluorescent tube at night and raise it up in your head and wave it around, it'll light up. He said, really? Yeah, it's really neat. We do that back at home. There's power lines that run right past the horse farm across the street. And he said, you know what? Tonight you should take the rest of the camp up there. And I thought, okay. And so we had our day at camp, and we did the usual camp things and exercises. We did skits in the chapel at 4:30. And after it got dark, Dr. Slaughter rounded up everybody, and he says, Joe's got something cool to show you. And everybody said, Jason, you go. And I said, I'm not Jason. And nevertheless, we all went and we took all the fluorescent tubes out of all the cabins, so we left behind this dark campground. And we marched up the hillside, up to the ridge, and got up there, and all the kids were sitting there sort of a little indifferent, wondering what was going to happen. And they're like, what's going to happen, Jason? And I'm like, the name's Joe, and you guys have your fluorescent tubes. Now watch this. And I got to the rock at the top, and I held mine up, and it started to flicker, and I waved it around, and it got brighter, and everybody put theirs up, and suddenly there are 60 people holding these fluorescent tubes up, and they're lit, and their faces are lit, and I have shown them a miracle. And after that, my nickname changed immediately. And they called me Dolby. Because I had blinded them with science.
Science!
And so after that, things sort of picked up. And I really started to like camp. And I kind of opened up because I wasn't afraid people were going to beat me up. I wasn't afraid that there was a bully. I wasn't afraid a bear was going to claw me to death. And I got through the whole week, and I made friends, and we exchanged numbers, and we had our little programs, and we wrote KIT, keep in touch, and it's been fun knowing you. And I left there, and after years of being the most bullied kid in school, I was one of the cool kids. And so we laughed, and we cried, and we separated, and I had a better year in school the next time. And the next summer, I came back to camp, and I had a better summer. And with some of the confidence I'd gained in that experience, I kind of started thinking about life in general and some of my other things that set me out, and I came to kind of a thing that I figured out about myself that ended up being another secret. And I was bothered but excited to go to camp. And that year when I got to camp, Dr. Slaughter insisted that I call him Kemp, and he was my friend. And one morning, I hiked up there to the power lines, and I found him sitting on a rock, brooding. And we just talked about this and that. And predictably, he approached me with a topic, and he said, "You know, I think you have a secret you want to tell me." I said, "I don't know. I don't know. It's not really much of a secret." He goes, "I think you have a secret that you want to tell me and maybe some other people. And I think it has to do with what you're wearing." And I looked at myself, and I was wearing a magenta muscle shirt with little squiggles all over it. And I was wearing magenta espadrilles. And I thought, oh my God, I cannot believe I've gone out looking this matchy-matchy. He knows everything about me. Oh my God. And he goes, "It's okay." Because I had the same secret. And it wasn't as easy when I was your age. And he said, "You know, if you feel like telling people who you are and what you figured out about yourself, just remember this place is safe. This is not your home. This is not your family. It's not your church. It's not your school. All these people just know you here. And they love you." And he said, "Aren't you tired of being afraid?" And I did talk to my friends there. And everything was okay. And after camp, I went out into the outside world and I had a life. I still sucked at school. But I was comfortable. And the thing was, I didn't know until later that Kemp had a secret too. And that he was brooding about his secret up there that day. And his secret meant that I would not see him again. And when I processed why, and after some time had passed, I taught myself how to sew, and I cut a piece of fabric 3 feet by 6 feet. And I built a perfect replica of how the power lines look from that cut in the mountain. And when the Names Project quilt showed up in DC, I folded it up and I took it with me. And I thought, I'm going to put him in there so he won't be forgotten. Except I walked out into the middle of all that fabric and just had to take in how big it was and how impossible it was. And that was a time that was the worst time in the world. And I didn't want to lose him in there. So I carried it home with me and I folded it up. And I put it under my bed. And after that, I became a counselor myself, and I would show up at that same camp every summer, and I would take the kids up and show them how you could hold your lights up on the mountaintop. And I would go and I would sit under the power lines and just think about things. On the day my father died, I dug out the box under the bed where I kept the quilt panel I had made for Kemp Slaughter. And I took it out and I unfurled it like a flag and I draped it over my shoulders, maybe like a prayer shawl. And I sat on the edge of my bed and just stared at the wall until I could just picture trees and rocks and the view from that mountaintop. And look at my hands like they were claws. But you just keep on keeping on, even in a bad time. Just keep on. And the next time I went to camp, I noticed a new kid in one of our groups. Hadn't seen him before. He tended to lurk in a way that seemed familiar to me. And he always had his headphones on in a way that seemed familiar to me, but of course the technology advanced and your batteries never ran down. And one day I noticed he was walking out on the hillside, just wandering like he didn't belong and like he wasn't very comfortable. And I caught up to him and I said, "Hey, how's it going? How's camp treating you?" He goes, "It's okay, it's fine." I said, "Are you not making friends?" And he goes, "I just don't really do that. I don't have the knack." And I said, "You know what? I see you walking around here a lot. Let me show you something really cool. Power lines come through at the top of this mountain. It's amazing." And so we set off for the gap where the power comes through and descends into the valley. And we talked about this and that, and I listened, and I paid attention, and I offered him whatever advice I could. And as we got near the top, I said, "Let me tell you about this bear that used to live up here.